Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into one of those really intriguing financial puzzles. Japan's payment landscape. You think Japan, you think cutting edge tech, right?
Yeah,
Robotics, bullet trains, super advanced smartphones.
absolute top of the line stuff.
Yet for centuries, actual physical cash has been king. It's just a unique financial environment. But that's all changing, and changing fast. We're seeing this really profound shift, moving away from that deeply embedded cash culture towards a rapidly accelerating digital economy. So our mission today in this deep dive is to unpack how this is all happening. We want to pull out the key insights, how culture, government policy, market forces,
Okay.
how they're finally chipping away at that reliance on physical money. You'll find out how Japan, the country that actually invented the QR code, was weirdly slow to use it for payments.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And how outside pressures, like, say, tourism, are really shaking up everyday transactions now. We'll look at the big players, why Japanese credit card use is so different from what you might see in the West, and, well, what it all might mean for the future of money everywhere. Okay, so let's start there. This nation of paradoxes. Why did Japan, with all this amazing tech infrastructure, cling so tightly to physical cash for such a long time?
Well, it's fascinating because the preference for cash wasn't just, habit. It was deeply rooted in this incredible sense of trust and security. Japan has an exceptionally low crime rate, so people just weren't worried about carrying relatively large amounts of cash. It wasn't really a risk factor like it might be elsewhere,
Okay, so safety was a big part of it.
a huge part. And then you also had these highly developed but very internally focused payment systems already in place for banks. Things like BOJnet, ZenjaNet, these have been running smoothly for decades, handling big interbank transfers.
Right, so the big stuff was already digital, in a way.
Exactly. Add to that a massive network of ATMs everywhere, and, crucially, decades of really low, sometimes even negative inflation.
So holding cash didn't really cost you anything, it was rational.
Precisely. It was a perfectly sound financial decision for individuals. There was just no compelling reason, no urgency to switch to digital for everyday stuff, unlike the pressure seen in many other countries.
So it wasn't that they couldn't do digital, it was more, why bother? Combined with that sort of psychological comfort of physical money, it just worked.
That sums it up pretty well. A lack of perceived need.
Okay, but clearly something has shifted dramatically. So what's finally pushing this move away from cash is king? What are the big drivers now?
Right. And this is where it gets really interesting. You see this cultural inertia starting to meet very deliberate strategic policy. Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, that's METI. They launched this initiative called the Cashless Vision.
Okay.
And their initial target was to get cashless payments up to around 40% of all payments by 2025.
40%, and how are they doing?
Well, this is the kicker. They haven't just met that target. They've flown past it, way ahead of schedule.
Really?
Yeah, the cashless ratio was about 39% in 2023, and the latest figures for 2024 put it over 42%, maybe even 42.8%.
Wow, that's quite a jump in just a year.
It is. It shows there are some powerful catalysts really pushing things forward now. The COVID-19 pandemic definitely gave contactless a huge nudge for obvious reasons.
Sure, hygiene concerns and all that.
Exactly. And looking ahead, the upcoming Osaka Kansai Expo in 2025, which is committed to being fully cashless, that's acting as another big accelerator.
So these aren't just small nudges anymore, they're fundamentally changing habits.
You really are. Reshaping how people think about and use their money on a daily basis.
Okay, let's unpack that then. With this rapid shift happening, what payment methods are actually leading the charge? Who's using what?
Right, so if you look at the numbers, say, from 2023, the picture's quite imbalanced, but it reveals some really clear trends. By far, the biggest player, when you look at the value of transactions, is credit cards. They account for something like 83.5% of all cashless payment value.
83%, that's huge.
It's massive. We're talking over 100 trillion annually, and it's projected to grow even more. But, and this is key, it's not used like credit cards often are in, say, the US or Europe.
How so?
In Japan, they're often treated more like a near-cash tool. People use them for larger purchases, but there's a strong tendency to pay off the entire balance each month. Avoiding debt is a big cultural thing.
So less revolving credit, more convenience for bigger buys.
Exactly. This actually stems from historical regulations that, for a long time, kept banks out of the credit card lending game. So cards evolved differently there.
That makes sense. So it's like a charge card mentality almost, even if it's technically a credit card.
You could say that. It's definitely a different mindset.
Okay, so credit cards handle the big money value. But what about just sheer adoption? Like, how many people are actually using a specific method day to day?
Right, and that's where the story completely flips. The undeniable engine of growth in terms of consumer adoption is QR code payments.
QR codes, like the
Yeah.
ones we scan for websites.
The very same. Recent surveys show that something like 84% of consumers are using code payments for purchases. That's actually more than reported using physical credit cards.
Wow. Okay, that's surprising.
It is, especially given the irony we mentioned earlier. Japan invented the QR code back in '94.
But was slow to use it for payments.
Exactly. This huge growth wasn't just spontaneous. It was really driven by market leaders, particularly PayPay.
PayPay, I've heard of them. Backed by SoftBank, right?
That's the one. They have something like 70 million users now, maybe more, and control about two-thirds of the domestic QR code payment market.
How did they get so big so fast?
Aggressive tactics, massive cashback promotions, basically giving money away to get users hooked. And crucially, making it incredibly cheap and easy for merchants to sign up.
Easier than traditional card terminals.
Oh, much easier. Often, a merchant just needs to print out a unique QR code. No expensive hardware, no complex setup. That lowered the barrier massively, especially for smaller businesses.
Okay, so credit cards for value, QR codes for adoption growth. What else is in the mix?
Then you've got e-money and contactless payments. These make up about 5% of the cashless value. This includes things like the transportation IC cards, Suica, Pasmo.
Right, the ones you use for trains and buses.
Yeah, originally just for transport, but now you can use them in convenience stores, vending machines, lots of places. The underlying tech here is mostly Sony's Felica standard.
And that's different from the global standard.
It is. It's different from the NFC standard used in most smartphones globally, like Google Pay or Apple Pay outside Japan on some devices. This can create friction, especially for tourists whose phones might not have Felica chips.
Ah, I see. So tourists might struggle sometimes.
They might, although it's getting better. The pressure from tourism, especially after the Tokyo Olympics, is pushing for more acceptance of international NFC standards. You're seeing more terminals that can handle both now.
Okay. And what about debit cards? You barely mentioned them.
Right. Debit cards are a very minor player in retail payments, only about 2.9% of the cashless value. Lots of people have them linked to their bank accounts, but they're overwhelmingly used just for withdrawing cash from ATMs.
So strange. Why not use them for shopping?
It seems to tie back to how credit cards evolved, and that preference for either cash or using credit cards as that near-cash tool paid off quickly. Debit just never really caught on for point of sale.
Fascinating. So a really distinct landscape. Credit cards for big spends, QR codes driving daily use, e-money for convenience but with tech hurdles, and debit cards mostly for ATMs.
That's a good summary of the current state.
So stepping back a bit, beyond these specific payment types, what are the really big overarching forces pushing this whole transformation forward?
Well, it's really a mix of powerful factors working together. One of the absolute strongest is the government and those regulatory catalysts. We mentioned Medi's cashless vision. That's not just a vague goal. They're aiming for 80% cashless in the long run.
80%, that's ambitious.
Very.
Yeah.
And they're backing it up with concrete actions. Subsidies for retailers to install cashless terminals, point reward programs for consumers who use digital payments.
So incentivizing both sides?
Exactly. The government's digital agency even passed a cashless act, allowing people to pay certain government fees and taxes digitally. It sends a very clear signal. This is a national priority.
Okay, so strong government push. What else?
Another massive driver is the tourism and e-commerce imperative. This is a huge external pressure. Foreign visitor spending has exploded. It was over $7 trillion annualized in early 2024.
Wow.
And many of these tourists, particularly from places like South Korea or China, which are already heavily cashless, they just expect to be able to pay digitally. They demand it.
Right, they show up wanting to use their phones or cards.
Precisely. And merchants see this. When you hear stories about contactless payments doubling in popular tourist spots like ski regions, suddenly the business case for upgrading your payment system becomes very, very clear.
Makes sense. Follow the money.
Absolutely. And that Osaka Kansai Expo we mentioned. Being entirely cashless will force adoption in that whole region and likely have ripple effects.
Okay, government, tourism. What about the people themselves? Demographics.
Yeah, that's the third key piece, demographic and generational shifts. As you'd expect, younger, more tech-savvy generations are leading the charge. They grew up with smartphones, digital payments feel natural.
But Japan has an aging population, right?
It does, rapidly aging. And that presents a real challenge. Older generations often have a strong preference for the tangibility of cash. They feel it gives them better control over budgeting, maybe trust it more.
So that acts as a kind of natural brake on things moving too fast.
It does. It creates this tension between the push for digital and the comfort level of a significant part of the population. Bridging that generational divide is crucial.
It sounds like a huge undertaking, this shift. But surely it's not all been smooth sailing. What are the biggest roadblocks or challenges Japan is still facing on this path?
Oh, absolutely not smooth sailing.
Mm.
Despite all the momentum, there are still some really deep-seated challenges. We keep coming back to it, but that cash is king mentality is still a major factor. It's more than just habit. For many Japanese consumers, cash genuinely provides a kind of psychological comfort.
Comfort? In what way?
For budgeting, mainly. It's easier for some people to track spending when they physically hand over notes and coins. There's a fear of overspending with digital methods.
Right, the invisible money problem.
Exactly. So building digital trust isn't just about security. It's about convincing people that digital methods can be just as easy to manage, maybe even easier, than the cash they've trusted for centuries, especially after decades where cash held its value so well due to low inflation.
That's a big perception shift needed. What about security itself? Are people worried?
Very much so. Security, trust, and fraud concerns are actually among the highest globally in Japan, despite their tech reputation.
Really? Why is that?
Well, there are reasons. Credit card fraud has seen a noticeable uptick, rising almost 24% year-on-year recently. There have been high-profile data breaches, even things like security flaws being discovered in the past in Sony's Felica chips, which underpin a lot of the e-money systems.
Oof, okay. So the fears aren't entirely unfounded.
Not entirely. Authorities are definitely aware and pushing hard for stronger global standards like PCI DSS for card data and implementing new regulations like the TFDPA to protect consumer data and, crucially, rebuild that trust.
Makes sense. What about the businesses, especially the smaller ones? Are there hurdles for them?
Yes, significant merchant side hurdles, particularly for SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises. One big issue is the cost. Traditional credit card processing fees can be quite high in Japan, sometimes reported between 2% and 5%.
That eats into margins for a small shop.
Definitely. Plus, it can sometimes take a while for them to actually receive the funds from card transactions. And the initial cost of buying or renting the card terminals themselves can be prohibitive for some.
So it's expensive and slow?
It can be. And the payment landscape is also quite fragmented, lots of different systems, which can be confusing for merchants to navigate.
Which explains why those simple QR code systems took off so fast.
Precisely. PayPay and others offered a solution with very low, sometimes zero, installation costs and often lower transaction fees. It directly addressed those pain points for merchants.
Okay, so we've mentioned PayPay quite a bit. Who are the other major players really shaping this market? What are their strategies?
It's a really dynamic battlefield, essentially pitting these agile tech giants against the more established financial institutions. In the tech corner, the ecosystem giants are key. You talked about PayPay. Their dominance comes from that aggressive user acquisition, huge promotions, and building that massive merchant network. Millions of locations accept it now.
They really blanketed the market.
They did. Then you have Rakuten Group. They're different beast. A huge conglomerate covering e-commerce, travel, banking, mobile services, everything.
Right, they're everywhere online.
Exactly. And they leverage that whole ecosystem. Their Rakuten Pay service is integrated across all their platforms. Their biggest weapon, though, is probably their point reward program.
Rakuten points. They're famous.
Super famous. You earn points on basically anything you do within their ecosystem, and you can spend them anywhere, too. It creates this incredibly strong loyalty loop, keeping users sticky.
Clever. So ecosystem players are leveraging their scale and user base. What about the traditional banks and newer fintechs?
The traditional financial institutions, big names like Mizuho, Sumitomo Mitsui's SMBC, Mitsubishi UFJ, MUFG, they're adapting, often by partnering with tech companies rather than trying to build everything themselves. Japan Post Bank is also interesting, using its vast network of post offices to provide payment access across the country, even in rural areas.
And the smaller startups, the fintech scene.
It's active, though venture capital funding has dipped a bit since a peak in 2021. Still, maybe 30–40% of fintechs are focused on payments. But they face challenges. Japan has quite heavy licensing requirements, and the established banks can sometimes be conservative partners. The government is actually trying to address this, trying to attract foreign fintech firms to inject more competition and innovation.
So a real mix of giants, incumbents adapting, and newer players trying to find niches.
That's the picture. It's very competitive.
Okay, that gives us a great sense of the internal dynamics. But how does Japan's whole payment journey compare globally? How does it stack up against its neighbors in East Asia or maybe markets like the US?
Yeah, putting it in global context really highlights how unique Japan's path has been. If you look at East Asian comparisons, South Korea is often called a cashless champion. They're at something like 96% cashless adoption.
96%. Wow.
Yeah, driven heavily by smartphones and just strong consumer demand. China's story is different, again, maybe around 60% cashless, but they had this incredibly rapid mobile-first revolution led by just two dominant platforms, Alipay and WeChat Pay, handling almost everything via QR codes.
Right, the super apps.
Exactly. Japan's journey, in contrast, has been much more cautious, more gradual, and significantly more government-led. There's also, as we touched on, a distinct wariness about adopting foreign platforms, especially from China. Data privacy concerns are often cited.
So they prefer homegrown solutions.
Very much so. The success of PayPay, a domestic player, although with SoftBank's global reach, really underscores this. It suggests that just trying to copy the Chinese model directly wouldn't have worked and probably won't work in Japan.
Interesting. And what about comparing it to the West, like the US?
The most striking difference is that credit card culture we discussed.
Right, the near cash versus revolving debt thing.
Precisely. In Japan, cards are used for higher average transaction values, but with far less borrowing, far fewer people carrying a balance month to month. In the U.S., it's common. Maybe half of cardholders carry a balance.
That's a fundamental difference.
It really is, and it's super important for any international financial company looking at the Japanese market. A business model that relies heavily on interest income from revolving credit just might not be as effective there.
You have to understand the local context, the local behavior.
Absolutely critical.
So looking forward then, what's on the horizon for Japan's payments? What are the next big things? And what kind of advice comes out of this whole story for businesses or policymakers?
Well, the landscape is definitely set for more evolution. There are some key emerging technologies and strategic shifts happening. On the tech side, the Bank of Japan, the BOJ, is seriously exploring a central bank digital currency, CBDC. They started a pilot program back in 2023.
A digital yen.
Potentially, yes. They see it as potentially critical infrastructure for the future. It's still experimental, but it shows the direction of thinking at the highest level.
What else on the tech front?
We're seeing things like generative AI being used more for sophisticated fraud detection, which ties back to building that trust we talked about. There's also growing interest in embedded finance, seamlessly integrating payment options into other apps and services.
So payments become almost invisible.
That's the idea. And crucially, those core interbank systems, BOJnet and ZenjiNet, they're undergoing major upgrades. They're modernizing to support things like extended operating hours and global messaging standards like ISO 2022.
Which means?
It signals a move towards a more open, more efficient, and more globally integrated financial system for Japan, less inwardly focused than in the past.
Oh, okay, so lots of development. Based on all this, what are the key takeaways? What are the strategic recommendations?
I think a few clear things emerge. For any company wanting to enter the market, the absolute priority has to be building trust and really localizing your solution. Understand the cultural sensitivities around money and debt.
Don't just assume your model works everywhere.
Exactly. Partnering with established Japanese players or finding ways to tap into existing ecosystems like Rakuten's Points program is probably going to be much more effective than trying to go it completely alone.
Makes sense. What about merchants already there, especially the smaller ones?
For merchants, particularly SMEs, the advice seems clear. Embrace those low-cost, easy-to-use solutions like QR codes. They lower the barrier significantly. And given the tourism boom, accepting international NFC payments is becoming pretty essential to capture that growing market. Offering multiple payment options is just good practice now, reduces friction for everyone.
Be flexible, basically.
Right. And finally, for policymakers, the focus needs to remain on promoting standardization and interoperability between all these different systems. Making it seamless for users is key. Addressing those high merchant fees for card payments and continuing to provide incentives for SMEs to adopt digital tools will be crucial if they want to hit that ambitious 80% cashless target.
And keep modernizing the core infrastructure.
Absolutely. That's fundamental for security, efficiency, and keeping Japan competitive globally.
Or it really is a profound, and it sounds like irreversible transformation happening in Japan's payment industry.
Yeah.
Moving from this unique, deeply ingrained cash culture towards a digital future, driven by this combination of government push, tech innovation, and those external pressures like tourism.
That's right. It's a fascinating convergence of forces.
And it seems the real key to understanding it all and navigating it is appreciating that complex dance between those long-held cultural preferences and these really powerful agents of change. The future of the market really seems to hinge on building that digital trust, finding ways to include everyone, bridging those generational gaps, and ultimately creating a payment system that feels both modern and uniquely Japanese, honoring the heritage while embracing the future.
Well put. It's about finding that balance.
So, as you, our listener, reflect on this deep dive, maybe consider this. What level of digital trust would you personally need to completely give up physical cash in your own daily life? What would it take? And how might Japan's very specific journey, with all its paradoxes and its deliberate, proactive adaptation, how might that influence the wider global conversation about building digital economies that are not just efficient, but also truly inclusive and trusted by everyone? Something to think about as you continue your own deep dives.